Philosopher and mathematician Alfred North Whitehead once wrote about Plato, saying that all of Western philosophy is but a footnote to Plato. While some might think it's exaggerated, in my opinion, it actually might be right. Hello and welcome to this video. Today we're going to be talking about Plato's Republic and why you should read it. I am Joshua Yen, your host of Philosophy for All, and an undergraduate student at the University of Oxford reading philosophy and theology. This is a revival of a series I used to make on this channel, where I introduce you to some of the leading works in the history of philosophy to hopefully provide you with some food for thought. Today we're talking about, of course, Plato and his Plato's Republic. Although Plato's written a lot of other works which are equally as influential and have covered different topics. For example, metaphysics, talks about ethics, talks more about psychology. What I like about the Republic and why I've decided to start here is because it encapsulates almost all of Plato's ideas. You have these ideas in the Phaedrus, which are here, the tripartite division of the soul. You have a lot of other ideas like the threefold dilemma, questions about goodness and God, which are also raised in Plato's Republic. Of course, those are not raised as in-depth as those books, but Plato's Republic kind of gives you a very good summary of that issue. So, and that goes without saying, and also with the quote that I've quoted you with at the start of this video, all of Western philosophy is but a footnote to Plato. What I am trying to bring you with this first point of why you should read Plato's Republic is that it has wide-reaching implications on almost every single possible, conceivable aspect or discussion of philosophy, or what people like to call nowadays psychology or psychoanalysis. First of all, questions of metaphysics are raised. Metaphysics is this idea of not only what the world is as we experience it in this empirical sense, but what things truly are. Plato touches upon that with his form of the good. The idea that there's this world of forms which exists beyond the kind of the physical world, which we use to understand how objects really are in their reality, in this kind of, I guess if you use a Kantian distinction, in their noumenal essence instead of this phenomenal experience of them. So for example, while that's not exactly what Plato is saying, that's a way to kind of distinguish between forms and reality. What we're thinking about is, well, okay, what makes this book similar to all the books I have on my bookshelf? Well, there's a form of a book which draws these ideas together. And he says there's a lot of these forms leading on to the highest form, which is the form of the good. And that the form of the good is kind of this idea that we should be contemplating towards in this ideal situation. And of course, by raising the form of good, he also touches upon what ethics are in its essence, not only about, well, how should we act, but also, well, why should we act in the way that we do? Why should we pursue justice? And in fact, if you're reading this book of Plato's Republic, you'll notice that the whole book is a response to Glaucon and Thrasymachus, two characters of this book, a challenge to Socrates, to ask Socrates, well, can you tell us why we should pursue good over evil when it seems like people who do evil seem to get such an advantage in this world? Why should we still do good? Well, Plato is trying to respond to this question in Plato's Republic. So in some sense, not only is he talking about ethics in this kind of form of the good, this ideal sense, he's also talking about it in a political sense. He's talking about, well, why should we pursue justice? Why should we pursue goodness? But of course, a similar question in why we should pursue justice, and this is something Plato also touches upon, is, well, what is justice and in what system is justice best developed? How can we have just people? Well, then he presents his unique idea of totalitarianism being the best form of government, or at least a society in which the philosopher kings, this body of philosopher kings, are ruling and controlling the government. So in that sense, he's also touching on politics as well. Now you take a step back and you're like, well, hold up a second. That's not all Plato's talking about. He's talking about epistemology. How do we know this form of the good? We've drawn politics, we've drawn ethics out of this form of the good, we've drawn metaphysics out of this form of the good. But how do we know this form of the good? Plato has this idea of a cave, the cave analogy. We are kind of working out of this cave to understand more about reality. We're getting a new view of what things truly are in their essence, this good, the form of the good. Well, how does that process act? Are we looking merely at reflections of this good? Are people trying to tell us what those reflections are? Do we have to call out to the cave? How then do we leave this cave? Well, that's a question of epistemology and how we know what things are. What is the nature of knowledge? Plato is touching upon that as well. And beyond all of this that I've talked about, he also touches on psychoanalysis in the sense of, well, what you notice in Plato and Anthony Kenny's work on this called Mental Health in Plato's Republic is fascinating work that I would highly recommend you to read. He then says, well, okay, hold up a second. You should take a step back and look at Plato from a psychoanalytical perspective as well. there he presents the tripartite division of the soul, saying the mind is split into three forms: the rational, the spirited, and the appetitive. And we'll get back to that later on in this video, because I think it provides other further thought for research, or an inquiry. But that idea of the mind being split into three sides then kind of touches into Freud, where he says, well, there's the ego, the superego, and the id. Well, this idea of the rational being, in theory, the minds, the ideas, the goodness, the good contemplating form of us. Well, should we be following that, or should we be following our pride, our honor-loving, our spirited nature for money and wealth and status, or should we be following our lust, our desires, the appetitive side? Well, that's a fundamentally psychoanalytical question, and we'll get more into how Plato works on this. So if you want me to analyze any more about Plato's Republic, then let me know. I'll make more videos on that in the future. But you get the idea. What Plato does with the Republic is a brilliant exegesis and a brilliant analysis of all these different fields of philosophy. And for this reason, Alfred North Whitehead says all of Western philosophy is but a footnote to Plato. When you're reading, and when I was reading and studying and researching the Plato's Republic for one of my courses at Oxford, I just realized just how true that statement is. Now, the second reason why you should read Plato's Republic is it challenges your conceptions of what is right and wrong, challenges your conceptions of justice, it challenges your conception of morality. And the best way it does that is, and there's a lot of ways it does it, but the best way to talk about it is it's fundamentally anti-democratic. We live in the West where we prize democracy as this form of, the best form of government. We look at the West, we look at America. Well, maybe not America now, but people used to look at America and say, well, America's protecting democracy and this value of democracy. In situations of social unrest, people on media are like, oh, we need democracy. They're crushing democracy. But if you read Plato's Republic, you notice that actually the work in which all of Western philosophy is a footnote to is perhaps one of the harshest critiques and harshest critics of philosophy that you'll ever find in literature. I don't think I've read any stronger criticisms of democracy than in Plato's Republic. He compares 5 different types of cities, and he ranks democracy as one of the worst types of cities out of that 5, which is absolutely shocking. But at the same time, it is somewhat true. If you think about his influence at the time, he was writing in this kind of Athens, in this city-state of Athens, where democracy was, of course, a very big idea, and many people might go into reading the Republic thinking that Plato was this great bastion of democracy because, okay, he was Greek and the Greeks liked democracy, therefore Plato must be democratic. Well, that really wasn't the case. Plato looked at the system in Sparta, the city-state of Sparta, and said, actually, the system of what they're doing there is very good. They have some strict discipline set down by the elders, people follow it, and they have a very efficient and strong government. Now, of course, whether that really was the situation of the Spartans, I'm not a historian to be able to tell you, but that was what Plato was looking at as his model for an ideal society where a group of philosopher kings ruled everyone else. Now, that is not to say he wasn't unaware, he wasn't aware of the problems of a situation of a totalitarian city. For example, he writes that the philosopher kings must have the most difficult lives, so that the only reason why people want to be a philosopher king is because they want to do the right thing. They must crush the appetite, they must crush the spirited in order to follow the rational and be the philosopher king. Yes, he does recognize those issues, but even then, when he considers, okay, a system could go bad, this kind of totalitarian state could fall into an oligarchy, he still ranks both of those states before a democracy. So there's this fundamentally kind of thought-provoking nature to Plato, which really then allows us to challenge our fundamental assumptions about government, which I highly recommend, which is another reason for why I highly recommend you to read Plato's Republic. Now, of course, the reason why I say that, of course, if you want more about that kind of anti-democratic kind of tendencies and criticism of it, highly recommend you to read Karl Popper's The Open State and Its Enemies, where he identifies Plato as perhaps the first or one of the most notable enemies of the open state, to what Karl Popper called the open state, at least. Whether that is really the open state or not is a different debate, and we could discuss that more in future videos. Let me know in the comments below. But of course, that's the second reason why you should read Plato. And I don't want to get carried away because I could really go on this forever. But the third reason why you should read Plato's Republic is because it makes you question your own intentions. When I was reading the Plato, and when I was rereading again this summer for some revision, I just realized how much this spoke to me psychologically and making myself analyze, why am I doing things the way I am doing things? When you think about your own life, when you think about your own pursuits, are you pursuing them because you genuinely think rationally? Remember the tripartite division of the soul. Are you doing things rationally because you think that is the best thing to do? Are you doing this because you just want to pursue some pride, you want to pursue some honor, you want to pursue some status? Or are you pursuing something to pursue your lustful desires, perhaps your appetitive spirit. How do you compare these three drives in your life? Now, Plato's comparison is just so clear. Now, of course, it might be too simplistic to summarize all of human drives to these three, but I do think there's something right in Plato's presentation. When I think about my life, I'm thinking, well, sometimes I do really just prioritize social status. Sometimes I do pursue the appetite. And maybe that's not wrong all the time. When I'm starving and I haven't eaten for like half a day, I'm like, well, probably I should follow the appetite of an eat instead of continue pondering upon philosophy. Maybe that's right. But on the flip side, there's times where that goes into excess. There's times where I care too much about social studies. There's times where I care too much about these other things. I need to pursue the rational and contemplate upon the good life. Well, that's a fundamentally Platonic theme, which is developed in Republic and, of course, in the Phaedrus, where he gives the analogy that everyone uses of the charioteer controlling the two horses, the appetitive and the spirited. That's what he's kind of saying here in the Phaedrus, but also in the Republic. But that's something that you need to think about. Now, finally, to end off this video, and I don't want to bore you for too long or keep you on this topic for too long, I want you to go and read this yourself. It demonstrates the value and importance of having a good dialogue. Now, before I talk about the importance of having good dialogue, if you want to get a copy of the Republic, I've put a link to this in the description below, so you should go check it out, and you'll be able to find it. I highly recommend this GMA Group translation. It's a very good translation to use. Used by the people in academia, really recommend it. But nonetheless, let's get back to the topic and talk about, well, how does this demonstrate the value of good dialogue? Well, in today's society, we live in a very polarized world. People are either politically polarized, religiously polarized. And I sometimes watch videos of people like Richard Dawkins on my shorts. I don't watch much internet theism, atheism, apologetic debate. That's not why I watch on YouTube. That's not what I go to YouTube for. Sometimes a short comes up and he's like, oh, I've never heard a good argument from the theist. And I'm like, you clearly haven't read much philosophy, mate. I'm sorry, you haven't read much philosophy. Or I go on to Fox News and I just hear just basically a monograph of these arguments against this kind of presupposed and straw man view of the left. And then the same goes the other way from CNN or those other platforms. And I'm like, well, there is really no good dialogue going on between these two sides. There's no good debates. And if that's the case, well, how can you actually get towards the truth? How can we actually move towards more unified, a more powerful, a more reflective society? Well, Plato's Republic provides a good solution towards that. We see people like Thrasymachus, we see people like Glaucon, we see people like Socrates who have vastly different views. Thrasymachus is a moral nihilist in most senses, in categories of a moral nihilistic view. You see Glaucon also wants to challenge that. He's almost this pragmatist to say, well, it can't just be better to do evil just because it might lead to good in the future or ease for me. And then you have Socrates with his own ideas about the form of the good. Each of these people are able to have this very good discussion. Well, Thrasymachus kind of disappears after book one, but everyone else has this very healthy kind of reflective, contemplative discussion, which I think would help us all in society today. If we all could be like Socrates, if we could all be like Glaucon, who of course is not the main character, he's not the hero, but be like Glaucon to challenge people who we disagree with, talking to them. Maybe that would help us forward in society. For these reasons, I'll highly recommend you to check out Plato's Republic. Very good book. Once again, links in the description below, and I will see you soon in the future. If you like this video, of course, like and subscribe, and let me know in the comments what more do you want to see. Are there any books that you want me to review? I'm thinking about maybe talking about Being in Time by Heidegger in the future, Nietzsche, go through all of his works, because I really like Nietzsche as well. Go through other works in the history of philosophy, maybe Levinas, Kierkegaard, things like that. Just let me know in the comments below and I'll tell you more in the future. I'll see you in there, and God bless. I'll see you in the next one.